الحمد لله رب العالمين والصلاة والسلام على رسول الكريم وعلى إخوانه من المرسلين ومن تبعهم بإحسان إلى يوم الدين أما بعد. So alhamdulillah, today we started with the recitation of Surah Al-Ma'idah, and so I wanted to basically talk about this surah and the beginning of the surah and sort of what it means in the context of where it's found in the Quran. And so today's tafsir may be a little heavy for some people, but it should be said, and I think hopefully it should be taken in the correct context of what I'm going to say about it, and hopefully it will be of some benefit. And I should say that before I begin that this really is I'm going to share some lessons that I learned from one of my teachers, Sheikh Muhammad Amin, Hafizahullah, regarding this surah. So Surah Al-Ma'idah, which means the table spread, one of the rules of tafsir is that when you look at a surah, you should look where it's found in the Quran and also the surah that comes before it and the surah that comes after it. Right? So same thing like when you look at a verse, you should look at the verse that comes before it as well as the verse that comes after it, so that you understand the context of what the verse is about. But also when you look at the surah, you take a step back and you see where the surah is in the Quran. There's a reason for why it's placed in that particular place. And then when you take another step back and you see that there are certain groups of surahs that have similar themes and why they're found together. Right, so this is one of the rules of tafsir that people should keep in mind. It's one of the basic rules of tafsir. So Surah Al-Ma'idah, which comes after Surah Al-Nisa, and Surah Al-Nisa, as we talked about, has to do with how to deal with arguments and disputes, and also has to deal with giving appropriate money and how to basically control and to take charge of one's money. So in the context of that, the last verse of Surah Al-Ma'idah, Surah Al-Nisa, has again to do with inheritance. And then Surah Al-Ma'idah starts off by saying that fulfill the trusts that you have. So there's a connection between the money that a person earns and then the discussion which Surah Al-Ma'idah, which means again the table spread, will go into about what are the civilizational values of Muslims, as if to say that when you have money, but if you don't spend it towards those things which are permissible and those things which are good, then that money is of no use at all. Right? And the trusts that you have been given, that you have before Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, you wouldn't have fulfilled them. So in the context of this, Surah Al-Ma'idah will then lay out what are the civilizational values for the Muslims. And what do I mean by civilizational values? So we look at, for example, for the United States, there's like the American flag, there's baseball, there's apple pie, right? There are things that are associated with a particular culture, right? Britain has like the Union Jack and of course the tandoori chicken, which they stole from the Indian subcontinent, and other things they stole during their conquest. But those are civilizational values for a given nation or a culture. So now that the Muslims, this is again a Madani surah, now that the Muslims have a civilization in Medina, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala is putting forth what are the civilizational values that define what the Muslim community is. So this is why there's the discussion about the sha'a'ir Allah, the symbols of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. So it is in this context that the famous verse, الْيَوْمَ أَكْمَلْتُ لَكُمْ دِينَكُمْ وَأَتْمَمْتُ عَلَيْكُمْ نِعْمَتِي, that today, on this day, I have perfected for you, الْيَوْمَ أَكْمَلْتُ لَكُمْ دِينَكُمْ, your religion, وَأَتْمَمْتُ عَلَيْكُمْ نِعْمَتِي, and I've completed my favor upon you, وَرَضِيتُ لَكُمُ الْإِسْلَامَ دِينًا, and I've chosen for you Islam as your religion. The discussions that then are, no pun intended, sandwiched before and after this verse have to do with the food that the Muslim civilization eats. Right? As if to say that whereas other civilizations have certain symbols that define them, that one of the things that defines the Muslim community is the food that they eat. Right? And there's no need to regulate fruits and vegetables. Right? Those are all at-tayyibat, but what should be regulated and what the community has to understand is the discussion about meat, right? About the meat that we consume and we eat. So this isn't to open up a whole Pandora's box of halal and haram and what's permissible and what's not, but what I want for us to sort of appreciate, why does this discussion of meat come in this particular context? Because it defines who we are as a Muslim civilization. That it's not just about halal and haram and what's permissible and what's not permissible. It's about what defines you as a Muslim community. And if you don't have a sense of pride and a sense of attachment to the civilizational values of Islam, then you don't have a community. Right? You're living in isolation. So just like you can't be an American if you don't have love for the American flag, you can't be properly a part of the Muslim community unless you have love for the symbols of Allah. And one of the symbols of Allah is the proper way to slaughter and to consume meat. Now, I'm not here to say that eating meat of the people of the book or outside meat, that's impermissible. I'm not opening up that discussion at all, so don't misunderstand. All right? Just as everyone, take a step back, take a deep breath. I'm not saying that at all. What I am saying, though, is that the Muslim ideal of consuming meat, which is the zabiha slaughter method, is a civilizational value that Muslims should have an attachment to because there's barakah in that. Right? So it may be permissible, according to some of the ulama, that you can eat whatever types of meat you come across from outside if it's considered people of the book or not. But the question cannot be asked, it's an undeniable fact that there's no barakah in that. What I mean, there's no blessing in that. Right? There's no blessedness in it. And the problem is when the Muslims came to this country in the 60s and the 70s, when the vast majority of immigration came, there wasn't these resources available, there was no sense of community, so everyone just took the rukhsa and the fatwa that was available that this was permissible. Now what's interesting is that when the Muslims went to places like South Africa and England, the ulama didn't give them these fatwas. So the Muslim communities in those places like New Zealand and Australia, that they went in and they invested in the meat and slaughtering industry because there's tremendous wealth in there, which is why it comes as no surprise that the very next surah after Surah Al-Ma'idah is what? Surah Al-An'am, the surah of the cattle, and An'am is from ni'mah, from blessing, to say that there's much barakah, there's much blessing and money and wealth that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala has put in those things. It comes as no surprise that Ibrahim alayhi salam, that he had vast herds of cattle as a symbol of his wealth, because these are symbols of Islam. And so what we as a Muslim community, especially now in America, we've reached a critical mass of people where we should stop settling for non-barakah meat. I don't want to call it haram meat. We should stop settling for non-barakah meat. Right? That can't be denied. We should demand barakah. Forget about halal and zabiha. Demand barakah in your meat. I would much rather, and I know that these discussions can get complicated about hand-slaughtered, machine-slaughtered, vertical cut, horizontal cut, organic, free-range, antibiotic-free, non-GMO, all these other things. It's enough to make your head spin. But what I am trying to say is that make an effort to have some connection or some attachment that you demand barakah in the food that you consume. That's my bigger point. Right? I would much rather people eat some form of zabiha, whether it's machine slaughtered, vertical cut, whatever it might be, rather than just saying, you know what, we're going to eat whatever we come across, everything is juice. And in a place like Chicago, alhamdulillah, we have so many options. And I'm telling you, the buying power of the Muslim community in America is estimated at over $300 billion. $300 billion. I mean, there's no reason why some smart entrepreneur can't just take over the meat and cattle industry, and there'll be tremendous barakah and tremendous wealth for the Muslim ummah in that. But the problem is we don't see and we don't have an attachment to what it means to be a civilizational value. We want to look for the fatwa and the rukhsa, and we don't look for the sunnah and the barakah. That's the problem. And that's the point that Surah Al-Ma'idah is saying. And that's why, again, it comes as no surprise that the end of Surah Al-Ma'idah, it comes with a discussion where the Hawariyin, the disciples around Isa alayhi salam, they ask him for what? A ma'idah, a table spread. Because what is the symbol that is being said in this surah is now that you as a Muslims are a civilization, you are the ones that should be inviting people to the table spread of Islam. Right? The ma'idah is this Islam that we have. And in order to have a table spread, in order to be host, you have to know what you're serving. So everyone quotes the ayah, وَطَعَامُ الَّذِينَ أُوتُوا الْكِتَابَ حِلٌّ لَكُمْ, that the food of the people of the book is permissible for you. But what about the words that come right after it? وَطَعَامُكُمْ حِلٌّ لَهُمْ. Right? And your food is permissible for them. And so instead of eating from them, we should be feeding them our barakah food. And who knows that if people start consuming, non-Muslims start consuming barakah-filled food of meat and the food of the Muslims, that will bring them to Islam. That's what we Muslims did. That's what we did. We fed people. When the Prophet ﷺ went to Medina, he said, Ya ayyuhan nas, afshu salam wa at'imu ta'am. That spread salam and feed people food. Right? And that's what we've lost, is that we've lost this idea that we should be feeding people, not we should be eating from people. That's a civilizational value of the Muslims. So this surah has to do with civilizational values, who we are as a community, what defines our identity. That is why Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala says, Al-yawma akmaltu lakum dinakum. That today I have perfected for you your religion. So we've got to grow up from this kindergarten argument that the American Muslim community has about halal and haram. We've got to have a much more intelligent and sophisticated discussion, and we should start asking ourselves, is what we're consuming, does it have barakah? Does it have blessing in it or not? So it may be legally permissible, but is that what we're going to settle for? Is that what, none of us want to settle for, wearing, if you wear some like torn shirt, I mean, that's, yeah, it still covers you, but people don't wear that. You want to, wear something which is nice, which is, which is a high standard. And same thing when the food that we consume, we should demand barakah, we should demand blessing. That's sort of the message for today. Again, I don't mean to open up that Pandora's box. You see, I was very careful not to use the word halal and haram, but I said we need to shift the discussion and the terminology that we use in these discussions to barakah filled versus non-barakah filled. And I think the discussion becomes a lot more easier when you shift the vocabulary that you use in having that discussion. And a lot of those questions that we as a Muslim community have, barakah filled, non-barakah filled, become very easily answered. May Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala give us the ability to appreciate the civilizational values, the symbols of Allah, the sha'a'ir of Allah, and may give us the ability to fill our lives, the things that we eat, the things that we do, the things that we wear, and our entire being with this beautiful value of barakah. Wa akhiru da'wana alhamdulillahi rabbil alamin.